The oceans have always been the ultimate arbiters of power. They are at once highways of commerce and arenas of strategic dominance. Today, the contest between Russia and the United States is no longer fought with fleets of surface ships or the occasional aircraft carrier spectacle. It is fought beneath the waves in the silent, invisible realm of submarines. Russia's latest undersea maneuvers, its deployment of advanced nuclear-capable submarines into the North Atlantic and Pacific corridors, has signaled a subtle but seismic shift in global power calculus. Unlike surface confrontations, these underwater operations evade conventional detection, creating a persistent uncertainty for U.S. naval planners and, by extension, global trade flows. The significance of this move cannot be overstated. For decades, the United States enjoyed uncontested supremacy at sea, translating directly into economic leverage. The ability to project power, secure trade routes, and dictate maritime norms underpinned both American economic security and international stability. Russia's underwater initiative challenges that supremacy in a manner that is strategic, legally ambiguous, and economically disruptive. Submarines operate in the gray zones of international law. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea provides a framework, but it is often slow to respond to asymmetric threats. What looks like a minor operational shift beneath the waves can have outsized consequences for trade choke points, insurance premiums, and the flow of energy supplies across Eurasia. Critically, the move also exposes the weaknesses of political oversight. Decisions about deploying such capabilities are made in secrecy, yet their consequences ripple through open markets and open societies. The gap between executive action and legislative accountability widens as a result, leaving citizens and even allies reliant on speculative intelligence and defensive posturing. The law lags behind technology, and in this case, lagging law can translate into immediate economic and strategic risk. Observers often frame the narrative in short-term headlines: Russia flexes its navy. Yet the real story is more complex. The strategic calculus is patient, methodical, and legally nuanced. A submarine, invisible in the depths, carries a geopolitical weight far greater than its tonnage suggests. The global system, which depends on predictable rules, now faces a subtle instability. Trade routes, nuclear deterrence balances, and allied commitments are all under pressure, not from overt aggression, but from ambiguity and technological asymmetry. The oceans, long considered conduits of American influence, are no longer uncontested. And the question emerges, can law and prudence contain a power that has learned to move in shadows beyond the immediate gaze of accountability? The oceans are more than strategic theaters. They are the circulatory system of the global economy. Roughly 90% of world trade traverses maritime routes, and even minor disruptions can reverberate across continents. Russia's undersea maneuvers do not merely threaten U.S. naval dominance, they threaten the integrity of this economic circulatory system. Energy shipments from the Persian Gulf to Europe, natural gas flows from Russia itself, containerized trade across the Pacific, and the increasingly vital semiconductor supply chains all navigate narrow corridors. A submarine lurking undetected in these choke points transforms theoretical risk into tangible economic uncertainty. Insurance rates spike. Shipping companies hedge against potential delays. Commodity markets respond preemptively, pricing risk that may never materialize into headlines but does manifest as higher costs for end consumers. Corporations that rely on just-in-time logistics confront the uncomfortable truth that a single undersea maneuver, invisible to the public and often opaque to regulators, can ripple through inventories and balance sheets. The rule of law, long considered a stabilizing factor in trade, is ill-equipped to prevent these disruptions. Legal frameworks like the freedom of navigation exist, but enforcement is inherently reactive and often symbolic. The economic system, so reliant on predictability, is forced to incorporate uncertainty into its calculus, a slow drip tax on efficiency and confidence. At the same time, political incompetence amplifies the effect. Washington's trade policy oscillates between protectionist posturing and reactive sanctions, rarely informed by precise military risk assessment. European policymakers, increasingly reliant on U.S. deterrence, are caught between energy pragmatism and strategic alignment. Russia, conversely, leverages ambiguity and patience. The deployment of submarines is a quiet form of coercion, a pressure applied incrementally but consistently without triggering overt war. It is both economic warfare and strategic signaling, all beneath the threshold of headline-driven intervention. Markets and governments respond differently, but the end game is the same. Uncertainty becomes leverage. Trade flows slow, hedging costs increase, and long-term planning becomes contingent on unreadable risk. Submarines, unobserved yet omnipresent, illustrate that economic influence no longer aligns neatly with political rhetoric or conventional naval strength. The power to disrupt global commerce quietly is, paradoxically, more potent than visible military escalation. In short, Russia's underwater initiative converts strategic stealth into economic pressure. The immediate impact is measured in market volatility and logistic adjustments. The long-term consequence is a recalibration of trust. Trust in alliances, trust in predictability, trust in the rule of law itself. Global trade, our civilization's circulatory system, has been made subtly fragile. The media excels at drama. Submarine sightings, naval exercises, and territorial posturing dominate the nightly cycle. Yet this is the camouflage of strategy. The true consequences of Russia's undersea expansion are measured not in sensational headlines, but in the slow, persistent shifts of global power. Submarines, unlike surface fleets, operate in time horizons that defy immediate political calculation. Their presence imposes latent constraints on decision-makers, shaping alliances, trade policy, and military readiness over years, not weeks. Short-term narratives obscure the patient architecture of influence being constructed beneath the waves. This is where the tension between law and power becomes stark. International law, particularly maritime law, relies on visibility and enforceability. Yet when a state can operate undetected in the deep, law becomes reactive, almost ceremonial. The U.S., long reliant on the predictability of its dominance, faces a strategic paradox. Its nuclear deterrence remains credible, yet conventional freedom of movement, the backbone of economic and military influence, is subtly contested. Allies notice. They recalibrate trust and dependency, sometimes quietly seeking alternative alignments or hedging strategies. The long-term effect is fragmentation, a weakening of unified Western posture, precisely the kind of asymmetrical advantage Russia seeks. Meanwhile, short-term headlines cultivate complacency or panic in equal measure. A submarine sighting sparks alarm but fades quickly. The public's attention is drawn to dramatic visuals, periscope sightings, fleet maneuvers, rather than the insidious cumulative recalibration of risk. Political leaders, incentivized by immediacy and optics, often misinterpret or downplay the strategic significance. Decisions made for the sake of messaging rather than analysis compound the problem. The U.S. response becomes a reactive pattern, predictable to those who observe patiently. Russia, conversely, acts slowly, deliberately, and invisibly, an embodiment of what one might call legal ambiguity as strategic weapon. The implications extend beyond immediate trade or security. Global norms, long buttressed by predictable U.S. power, face erosion. Strategic patience replaces headline victories. Nations with economic or territorial vulnerabilities begin to reassess partnerships, recalibrate deterrence, and hedge against contingencies that the public cannot even see. By the time conventional intelligence confirms the presence of a new undersea threat, the geopolitical chessboard has already shifted. In essence, what is invisible to the press is devastatingly visible to the patient strategist. The slow, deliberate contest beneath the waves reshapes global power far more effectively than overt confrontation. History will judge less by the flashes of crisis reported in real time and more by the quiet, persistent adjustments nations make in response to unseen threats. The submarine move, modest in immediate spectacle, has redrawn the long-term calculus of influence. Power beneath the waves exposes more than strategic vulnerability. It exposes political accountability. Submarine deployments are deliberate, high-stakes decisions, yet they occur in a space where secrecy is both necessary and convenient. Citizens, parliaments, and even allied governments often lack real-time insight into these choices. The U.S. executive branch, operating with extensive classified intelligence, faces the paradox of necessity versus oversight. Decisions must be swift, precise, and technically informed, yet the democratic mechanisms designed to ensure legitimacy and accountability are ill-suited for invisible theaters of action. This creates an accountability gap, one that adversaries can exploit by applying persistent, low-visibility pressure while domestic scrutiny lags. Russia understands this gap intuitively. Its leaders operate in a system where secrecy is a strategic asset and public accountability is minimal. The deployment of advanced submarines is therefore both a military and a political tool. It forces the U.S. into defensive postures, compelling responses that are necessarily public and subject to scrutiny and debate. Every adjustment the U.S. makes, naval exercises, diplomatic protests, sanctions, is visible. Every Russian maneuver, in contrast, is largely opaque. This asymmetry underscores the strategic advantage of operating where law and observation falter. Yet accountability is not merely a procedural concern, it shapes risk tolerance. Political leaders, acutely aware that misjudgment will be magnified in public forums, may underreact or overreact. Overreaction invites economic and diplomatic consequences. Underreaction invites strategic encroachment. Both scenarios are exploitative for the patient, technically adept adversary. The submarine, as a symbol of invisible power, embodies this challenge. It forces leaders to act without complete knowledge, to project deterrence without certainty, and to negotiate peace in a domain where law struggles to assert itself. The governance implications extend beyond immediate military response. Defense budgets, intelligence priorities, and alliance commitments are all influenced by these unseen pressures. Missteps reverberate across decades as procurement cycles, technological adaptation, and strategic culture adjust to accommodate new realities. Leadership, in this sense, is a function not merely of decision-making skill, but of institutional resilience. The submarine is a test of that resilience, a probe into the capacity of political and military structures to respond intelligently under ambiguity. In sum, underwater power projection transforms leadership into a contest of judgment under opacity. Success favors those who exploit the legal and informational gaps. Failure penalizes those constrained by democratic scrutiny, institutional inertia, or public expectation. Accountability in this arena is not optional. It is strategic. And the consequences of neglect are measured not in headlines, but in decades of altered global equilibrium. The contest beneath the waves is not ephemeral, it is structural, slow-moving, and consequential in ways that headlines cannot capture. Russia's submarine initiative has not sparked immediate confrontation, but it has recalibrated global calculations. Deterrence, once a straightforward function of U.S. naval supremacy, now requires continuous technologically sophisticated monitoring, rapid intelligence interpretation, and readiness to act in domains that are inherently opaque. The long-term consequence is strategic uncertainty, a pervasive tension that will shape decision-making for decades. Realistically, the United States will maintain its nuclear deterrent and significant conventional capabilities, but unchallenged maritime supremacy is no longer guaranteed. Russia has demonstrated that it can impose risk without overt aggression, a mode of influence that combines stealth, legal ambiguity, and technical sophistication. Other global actors, China, regional powers, and even NATO members, observe and learn. They internalize lessons about asymmetry, operational patience, and the utility of ambiguity. Submarine operations, invisible yet persistent, effectively teach the world that power need not be exercised visibly to be consequential. The economic and legal implications are equally enduring. Trade networks will continue to operate, but risk premiums, hedging strategies, and insurance adjustments will persist. Maritime law will struggle to keep pace with technological innovation. International norms, which once relied on the predictability of U.S. maritime power, will increasingly accommodate calculated uncertainty. Markets, supply chains, and strategic planning will all internalize this subtle fragility. Nations that fail to account for it will experience strategic surprise, often belatedly and at great cost. This is not a call for panic, but for sober realism. Political incompetence, misreading signals, prioritizing optics over strategy, or underestimating subtle maneuvers remains the most dangerous variable. Leaders who assume that power is visible and immediate will discover that the real contest is invisible, patient, and relentless. Accountability, law, and prudence are no longer optional. They are strategic imperatives. Decisions made today will resonate across decades, shaping alliances, trade dependencies, and deterrence postures far into the future. Ultimately, the submarine move has done more than shift tactical balances. It has altered the grammar of global power. The oceans, once predictable conduits of influence, are now arenas of latent leverage. Law struggles to contain stealth. Economies adjust to subtle risk. Leadership is tested by ambiguity. Russia's maneuver demonstrates a central truth. Power exercised quietly can be more consequential than power displayed theatrically. The question now is not whether the U.S. will respond, but whether it will respond wisely with patience, clarity, and recognition that the most dangerous threats are those we cannot see.